I stared at my phone screen, reading the text message from my mother for the third time. Family dinner tonight at 7. Your father insists you come. Don't be late. The words were polite enough, but I could feel the coldness seeping through each letter, that familiar tone that made it clear this wasn't really an invitation. It was a summons. I had just finished a long shift at the Riverside Art Gallery where I worked as an assistant curator. My clothes still had specks of paint on them from helping hang a new exhibition, and I was exhausted. The last thing I wanted was to drive across town to sit through another evening of thinly veiled criticism and comparison. But saying no to Catherine Westwood wasn't really an option. It never had been. The drive to my childhood home in the affluent suburb of Meadowbrook took 40 minutes. As I turned onto Elm Ridge Avenue, the houses grew larger, the lawns more manicured. When I pulled up to the familiar colonial-style mansion with its perfectly trimmed hedges and fountain in the circular driveway, I immediately noticed Brandon's Mercedes G-Wagon parked right at the front entrance, gleaming under the streetlights like a trophy. Behind it sat Tiffany's Audi R8, cherry red and impossible to miss. My beat-up Honda Civic looked pathetic next to these machines. I had to park it all the way at the end of the street near the trash bins that the neighbors kept tastefully hidden behind decorative screens. As I walked back toward the house, I could already hear the laughter and animated conversation drifting through the open windows. The warm glow from inside made the house look inviting, like a Thomas Kinkade painting. But I knew better. The moment I stepped through the front door, the sounds from the dining room grew louder. I could make out Brandon's voice, confident and booming, telling some story that had everyone entertained. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the dining room, my worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the marble floor. Brandon saw me first. He was standing near the head of the table in an immaculate navy suit, his arm wrapped possessively around Tiffany's tiny waist. His lips curved into that smirk I knew so well, the one that made my stomach clench. "Oh wow, the Cinderella princess finally graces us with her presence at the palace," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Tiffany giggled, pressing herself closer to him. She looked perfect as always, her blonde hair in glossy waves, her designer dress probably costing more than my monthly rent. My mother turned from where she was adjusting the floral centerpiece, her eyes immediately scanning me from head to toe. I watched her expression shift from neutral to disapproving in the space of a heartbeat. "Alyssa, you're here. Why on earth are you dressed like that?" Catherine's voice was sharp, cutting through the warm atmosphere like ice water. "You look like you just crawled out from a kitchen corner." "We have important business associates of Brandon's coming tonight." Her gaze lingered on the paint stains on my jeans, the oversized cardigan I'd thrown on to hide them. My father, Richard, barely glanced up from his conversation with Brandon about quarterly earnings and market projections. He gave me the briefest nod, an acknowledgement of my existence, before immediately turning back to my brother. That casual dismissal hurt more than my mother's criticism. At least when she spoke to me, she saw me. Dad looked through me as if I were made of glass. I took my usual seat at the far corner of the dining table next to the empty chair that was perpetually reserved for some important guest who never seemed to materialize. It was the seat with the worst view, furthest from the conversation, closest to the kitchen door, where the staff came in and out. It had always been my spot, even when I was a child. The dining room itself was a monument to my mother's taste. Crystal chandelier, imported wallpaper with subtle gold, threading a table that could seat 16 people comfortably. The china we used tonight was Wedgwood, reserved for special occasions. Each place setting probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. The silverware was actual silver, polished weekly by the housekeeper. Fresh roses in Waterford vases sat at intervals along the table, their perfume mixing with the aroma of roasted lamb and rosemary. I remembered being 12 years old, sitting in this same corner seat watching Brandon receive his first trophy for debate team. My parents had thrown a celebration dinner inviting family friends and Brandon's teachers. I'd won a regional art competition that same week, but nobody had mentioned it. When I'd tried to bring it up, my mother had shushed me. "Not now, Alyssa. This is Brandon's night." That pattern had repeated itself for 16 years. The dinner began with the usual parade of courses. My mother had outdone herself as always, making sure everything was perfect for Brandon's big night. Maria, the housekeeper who'd worked for our family for 20 years, brought out the first course, a delicate lobster bisque in bone china bowls. She caught my eye and gave me a small, sympathetic smile. Maria had seen everything over the years. She knew. Apparently, Brandon was about to close some massive deal that would make him the youngest vice president in his company's history. The contract was worth millions, and from the way my parents were fawning over him, you'd think he'd just been nominated for a Nobel Prize. "This is incredible, son," my father said, raising his wine glass. The wine was a 2015 Chateau Margaux, something my father only broke out for truly special occasions. Vice president at 28. When I was your age, I was still trying to make junior partner. Brandon accepted the praise with practiced modesty, though his chest puffed out noticeably. I've worked hard for it, Dad. The Henderson deal is going to revolutionize our entire approach to commercial real estate development. We're talking about a 15-building complex in the downtown corridor. Mixed-use residential and commercial. It's going to transform the whole waterfront district. He went into extensive detail about the project, using terminology that he knew would impress our father. Cap rates, NOI projections, leveraged buyouts. My father listened with rapt attention, asking intelligent questions, nodding approvingly. This was the kind of conversation they lived for, the language of money and power and influence. Tiffany leaned in, her perfectly manicured nails resting on Brandon's arm. Her engagement ring caught the light, a 3-carat diamond that Brandon had proposed with just 2 months ago. The proposal had made the society pages. My genius boyfriend, she cooed. I keep telling him he's going to run the whole company someday. Maybe the whole city. My mother laughed, delighted. With his talent and drive, I wouldn't be surprised. Richard, remember when we used to joke that Brandon would be mayor someday? I remember, my father said warmly. And I still think it's possible. Son, you've got the intelligence, the charisma, the connections. The world is yours. I took a sip of my wine, trying to make myself smaller in my corner seat. The bisque was delicious, but it tasted like ashes in my mouth. I'd heard versions of this conversation 100 times before. Brandon, the golden child. Brandon, the genius. Brandon, the future. Catherine turned her attention to me suddenly, as if remembering I existed. Brandon is so accomplished. And here you are, Alyssa, still playing around at that little gallery. When are you going to do something serious with your life? You're 26 years old. Don't you think it's time to consider a real career? The words hit like physical blows. I'd heard them before, but they never stopped hurting. I'm building my reputation, Mom. It takes time in the art world. I've been promoted twice in the last year. I'm curating my first major exhibition next month. My mother waved her hand dismissively. Curating. What does that even mean? Are you making any real money? Can you support yourself? Or are you still living in that dreadful little apartment downtown? It's a studio, I said quietly. And yes, I support myself. Brandon let out a sharp laugh. Building your reputation. Or building castles in the sand. I've heard things, little sister. Word gets around in this city. Your gallery is hemorrhaging money. The owner is looking for buyers. The whole operation is about to fold. I felt ice water pour down my spine. How did he know that the gallery's financial troubles were supposed to be confidential, known only to senior staff? I was assistant curator, but even I had only found out last week when my boss David had pulled me aside to warn me that my position might not be secure beyond the next quarter. How do you know about that? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Brandon smirked. I have friends everywhere, Alyssa. Including on the board of directors for Riverside Arts Foundation. They mentioned your little gallery might be getting their funding pulled. Something about declining attendance and poor financial management. Apparently the art world isn't as forgiving as you thought. My hands clenched in my lap. He'd been checking up on me. Not out of brotherly concern, but to find ammunition. To find ways to prove I was failing while he was succeeding. The realization made me feel sick. The gallery is going through a transition period, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's normal in the arts. We're restructuring, finding new donors. David has a solid plan. A transition period, Tiffany repeated, her voice mocking. She'd barely touched her bisque, probably worried about her figure. That's such a cute way to say failing. But hey, maybe you'll create a masterpiece out of all that scrap paper they're going to throw away when they close. As she spoke, I felt a sharp pain in my shin. She deliberately kicked me under the table hard enough that I knew it would leave a bruise. I bit down on my tongue, tasting copper. The pain in my leg was nothing compared to the humiliation burning through my chest. Everyone at the table had heard Tiffany's comment. My father had that tight expression he got when something embarrassed him, but he didn't want to acknowledge it. My mother was pursing her lips in that way. That meant she agreed, but wouldn't say so directly. At least I don't have to step on other people to climb up, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, but steady. The room went silent. Maria had just entered with the second course, seared scallops with a champagne beurre blanc, but she froze in the doorway, sensing the sudden tension. The only sound was the soft classical music playing from the built-in speakers, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, my mother's favorite. Brandon's expression darkened instantly. He stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, the sound like nails on a chalkboard in the sudden quiet. His hand shot out and knocked over my wine glass, sending the red liquid splashing across the white tablecloth and all over my paint-stained clothes. The burgundy stain spread across my chest like blood. "What did you just say to me?" Brandon's voice was low and dangerous, the kind of voice that made me remember all the times growing up, when he'd cornered me in hallways, when he'd accidentally broken my art projects, when he'd told me I was worthless and nobody would ever care about me. My mother gasped, but not in concern for me. "Brandon, be careful with your suit. That's Armani." My father frowned at me as if I'd caused this somehow. "Alyssa, what kind of scene are you making? This is a celebration dinner. Can't you just be happy for your brother for once?" I sat frozen wine dripping from my cardigan onto my lap, soaking through to my skin. It was cold and wet and humiliating. Brandon was staring down at me with such pure contempt that I felt like I might shatter under the weight of it. In his eyes, I saw everything I'd tried to ignore for years. He didn't just dislike me. He hated me. He genuinely deeply hated me. "You don't deserve to sit at this table with us," he said, his words cold and precise, each one landing like a slap. "You've always been nothing but a shadow. A disappointment. A waste of space and money. Mom and Dad spent a fortune on your education, and what do you have to show for it? You work at a failing gallery making $30,000 a year. I make that in a week." Tiffany was watching with gleaming eyes like she was at a show. This was entertainment to her. My mother had her hand over her mouth, but she wasn't telling Brandon to stop. She wasn't defending me. My father was staring at his plate, jaw tight, refusing to look at either of us. "Brandon, that's enough," I said, but my voice came out weak and shaky. "No, it's not enough," he said, his voice rising. "You sit here in your paint-stained clothes in your pathetic little corner seat and you judge me. You who've never accomplished anything. You who's never made Mom and Dad proud. You're jealous. You've always been jealous. You can't stand that I'm successful while you're a failure." Each word felt like it was designed to cut, and it was working. Tears were threatening at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. What happened next felt like it was in slow motion. Brandon reached across the table and grabbed my plate, the one with the lamb chops I'd been picking at, the meat now cold and congealed in its sauce. Maria had made them specially, remembering they were my favorite, with rosemary and garlic. Before I could process what was happening, he slammed the plate directly into my face. The ceramic shattered against my cheekbone. The impact was stunning, stars bursting behind my eyes. I felt the sharp sting, the warm sauce running down my face, chunks of meat sliding into my hair. Fragments of the broken plate scattered across the table and floor. The room erupted in a chaos of sound, my mother shrieking about the mess and the broken china. Tiffany's shocked laughter, high and cruel, my father's stern voice saying something I couldn't make out over the ringing in my ears. I tasted blood in my mouth. I'd bitten my tongue when the plate hit. I could feel something wet on my cheek, warmer than the sauce, and I realized dimly that I was bleeding. A shard of the plate must have cut me. Brandon leaned down close to me, his breath hot against my ear, his cologne expensive and suffocating. "You don't belong here. You never have. This table, this family, none of it is yours. You're not a Westwood. Not really. You're just the obligation we're stuck with. Now get out of my sight." I stood up slowly, my legs shaky beneath me. Sauce and wine dripped from my clothes and hair. A piece of lamb fell from my shoulder onto the expensive Persian rug, leaving a greasy stain. I looked at each of them in turn. My father had turned away completely, now his shoulders rigid with what I realized was embarrassment, not anger at Brandon, but at me for causing this scene. My mother was frantically picking up pieces of broken plate, muttering about the Wedgwood pattern being discontinued and impossible to replace. Tiffany had her phone out. She was taking pictures. That detail cut through the shock. She was documenting my humiliation. This would probably be a funny story she'd tell at brunch with her friends. Remember when Brandon's pathetic sister got a plate thrown at her face? God, it was hilarious. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody apologized. Nobody stopped me as I walked out of that dining room, tracking sauce and wine across the marble foyer, and let myself out the front door. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, not concerned but annoyed. Well, that was dramatic. "Maria, please clean this up. We can't have the Hendersons arriving to this mess." The Hendersons. They were still coming. Dinner was continuing. Life was going on as if I hadn't just been assaulted in my parents' dining room by their golden son. The night air hit my face, cool and shocking. I stood on the front steps for a moment, my whole body trembling. My cheek throbbed where the plate had hit me, and when I touched it gingerly, my fingers came away with blood mixed with sauce. A shard of ceramic must have cut me. I could feel other smaller cuts on my face, little stinging points where fragments had hit. I made it to my car before the tears started. I sat in the driver's seat of my beat-up Honda, surrounded by the smell of old coffee and art supplies, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was a mess of food, wine, and blood. My hair was matted and sticky with sauce. There was a piece of rosemary stuck above my ear. I looked like I'd been attacked, which I realized with a jolt of clarity that cut through the shock I had been. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out of my purse. I needed to call someone. I couldn't drive like this, couldn't see properly through the tears and the shock. I pulled up my contacts and found Jessica's name. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, are you okay? You sound weird." I tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. The dam broke, and suddenly I was crying so hard I couldn't breathe, gasping for air, my whole body shaking with the force of it. All the years of holding it in, of being strong, of trying to prove myself, it all came pouring out. "Alyssa. Alyssa, talk to me." "What's wrong?" Jessica's voice was sharp with concern. "Jess, I need you," I managed to get out between sobs. "Where are you?" "Outside my parents' house." "Brandon, I couldn't finish the sentence. "How did you explain to someone that your brother had thrown a plate in your face during dinner? How did you make that sound real?" "Stay there. I'm coming to get you. Don't you dare drive like this." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Can you wait 20 minutes? "Yes," I whispered. "Lock your doors. Put your hazards on." "I'm coming right now." She hung up, and I did what she said, locking the doors, turning on my hazard lights. I sat there in the dark, watching my parents' house through the windshield. The lights were warm and golden. Through the sheer curtains on the dining room window, I could see movement. They were continuing dinner. The plates were being changed, the next course being served. My empty seat had probably already been cleared away. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes, I saw headlights coming down the street. Jessica's red Jeep pulled up behind my car. She got out and ran to my window, her face shocked when she saw me. "Oh my God, Alyssa. What did they do to you?" She tried my door, but it was locked. "Honey, open the door. Let me help you." I fumbled with the lock, and she pulled the door open immediately, wrapping her arms around me. I collapsed against her, crying into her shoulder. She was wearing a nice blouse, and I was getting blood and sauce all over it, but she didn't seem to care. "We need to get you to a hospital," she said, pulling back to look at my face. "You're bleeding. How hard did he hit you?" "I don't need a hospital," I said. "It's not that bad. I just need to go home." "Alyssa, please. I just want to go home." She looked at me for a long moment, her jaw tight with anger, but finally she nodded. "Okay, but I'm coming with you. You're not being alone tonight. Come on, get in my car. We'll get yours tomorrow." She helped me out of my Honda and into her Jeep, buckling me in like I was a child. The drive to my apartment took 20 minutes, and she kept glancing over at me, clearly worried. I just stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, feeling numb now that the initial shock was wearing off. My apartment was in a converted warehouse downtown, part of what had once been the industrial district and was now slowly being gentrified. Artists and young professionals, people who couldn't afford the newer developments but wanted to live in the city. My studio was on the third floor, a single room with high ceilings and big windows, exposed brick and old wood floors. It was tiny, maybe 400 square feet, but it was mine. I decorated it with thrift store finds and my own artwork, strings of lights and plants everywhere. It was nothing like my parents' mansion, but I loved it. Jessica helped me inside and immediately went into caretaker mode. She got me into the bathroom, carefully helping me out of my ruined clothes. The wine and sauce had soaked through everything. She turned on the shower, testing the temperature, and gently pushed me under the spray. "I'll be right outside. Take your time. Get all that crap out of your hair." I stood under the hot water, watching it turn pink and brown as it swirled down the drain. I shampooed my hair 3 times, scrubbed my face gently around the cuts. The water stung, but it also felt cleansing, washing away not just the physical mess, but some of the humiliation too. When I finally turned off the water and stepped out, Jessica had laid out clean clothes for me, soft pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt. She'd also found my first aid kit, which was sitting open on the sink counter. I dried off and got dressed, then sat on the closed toilet lid while Jessica examined my face. "This cut on your cheekbone is pretty deep," she said gently. "Are you sure you don't want to go to urgent care? You might need stitches." "I'm sure," I said. "Just butterfly bandages. I'll be fine." She worked quietly, cleaning the cuts with antiseptic that burned, but I barely felt it. The physical pain was distant, muted. Everything felt muted. She applied butterfly bandages to the worst cut, then covered the smaller ones with antibiotic ointment. "Okay," she said finally. "Now tell me exactly what happened." And so I did. Sitting there in my tiny bathroom, I told her everything. Not just about tonight, but about all of it. Years of Brandon's cruelty, my parents' favoritism, the constant message that I wasn't good enough. I told her about birthdays forgotten and achievements dismissed. About Christmas mornings where Brandon got everything he asked for while I got practical gifts, clothes, and school supplies. About graduation, when I'd been accepted to a prestigious art program and my parents had barely acknowledged it because Brandon had just landed his first big job. I told her about the small cruelties. The way my mother would buy expensive jewelry for herself and Tiffany but tell me I needed to be more careful with money when I wanted to buy art supplies. The way my father would talk business with Brandon for hours but had never once asked about my work at the gallery. The way Brandon would introduce Tiffany to everyone at family events but would literally forget to mention I was there. I told her about the time 2 years ago when I'd gotten food poisoning at a family dinner and had spent the night vomiting in my childhood bathroom, and my mother had been more concerned about the noise disturbing Brandon's sleep than about my health. About last Thanksgiving when I'd worked for weeks on a centerpiece hand-painting a series of small canvases with autumn scenes and my mother had used them as placemats and they'd been ruined by water rings and food stains. Jessica listened to all of it, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked. "We've been friends for 4 years. Why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because saying it out loud makes it real," I whispered. As long as I didn't talk about it, I could pretend it was normal, that every family was like this, that I was just being too sensitive. "Alyssa, none of that is normal. None of it. That's abuse. What Brandon did tonight, that was assault. You could press charges." "I'm not pressing charges," I said immediately. "Why not?" "He deserves—" "Because it won't change anything," I said. "He's a Westwood. My parents would hire the best lawyers in the state. They'd make me look crazy or vindictive. They'd say I provoked him. Tiffany would back up whatever story he told. And in the end, I'd still be the disappointment daughter who caused problems, and he'd still be the golden child who just lost his temper one time." Jessica's jaw was tight with frustration, but she nodded. "Okay. Then what are you going to do?" "I don't know," I said, honestly. "Well, first thing you're going to do is stay away from them. Promise me, Alyssa. Promise me you won't go back there." "I promise," I said, and I meant it. Something had broken tonight, some invisible thread that had kept me tied to my family despite everything. I couldn't imagine sitting at that table again. Jessica made me tea, and we sat on my bed, which doubled as my couch since the apartment was too small for both. She'd found a bag of frozen peas in my freezer and made me hold it against my swelling cheek. We didn't talk about my family anymore. Instead, she told me about her week, about the ridiculous client drama at her PR firm, about the guy she'd gone on a date with who'd spent the entire evening talking about his crypto investments. Normal conversation. Normal life. It felt surreal after what had just happened, but it was also exactly what I needed. Around midnight, Jessica finally left, but only after I'd promised to call her tomorrow and to text her before bed so she knew I was okay. After she was gone, I stood in my bathroom again, looking at myself in the mirror under the harsh fluorescent light. The cuts were visible dark red lines against my pale skin. The bruise was already starting to form a purple shadow spreading across my cheekbone. My eyes were red and swollen from crying. I looked like exactly what I was, someone who'd been hurt. But as I stared at my reflection, something shifted inside me. The tears stopped. My mouth clenched. I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest where the hurt had been like water freezing into ice. "You want a war," I whispered to the mirror, to the ghosts of my family. "Fine. You'll get one." I walked back into my main room and grabbed my laptop. I opened it, created a new folder, and labeled it Evidence. Then I started documenting everything. I took photos of my face from multiple angles, making sure the injury was clearly visible, making sure the timestamp was on each one. I took pictures of my ruined clothes still in a pile on my bathroom floor. Then I went through my emails. Years of correspondence with my family. I'd never been the type to delete anything, a habit from my art history classes where we'd been taught to preserve everything. Now I was grateful for it. I found emails from my mother criticizing my career choices, comparing me unfavorably to Brandon. I found messages from my father, short and dismissive, usually responding to my attempts at conversation with single-word replies, while his emails to Brandon were paragraphs long full of advice and encouragement. I found text message threads, screenshots I'd taken of particularly hurtful exchanges. My mother telling me I was wasting my potential. Brandon sending me articles about the failure rate of art careers with laughing emojis. Tiffany's passive-aggressive comments about my clothes, my apartment, my life. I created a document and started organizing everything chronologically. A timeline of emotional abuse and favoritism spanning nearly 3 decades. It was methodical work requiring me to relive painful memories, but I felt strangely calm doing it. Focused. This was evidence. This was proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't oversensitive, wasn't the problem. Around 3 in the morning, I remembered something else. A few months ago, I'd been trying to film myself, preparing dinner for a cooking blog I'd briefly attempted to start. I'd set up my phone on the kitchen counter at my parents' house, propped up against a cookbook. But I'd gotten distracted and left it recording while I'd gone to help my mother with something in the other room. I'd completely forgotten about the video until now. I found it in my phone's camera roll, buried among hundreds of other photos and videos. It was 47 minutes long. I skipped through it quickly, watching the empty kitchen on fast forward. Then around the 15-minute mark, Brandon and Tiffany walked in. I slowed it to normal speed and watched. They didn't know the phone was recording. They were talking freely, their voices clear. Brandon was complaining about me. "She's so fucking pathetic. Did you see her face when Dad talked about my promotion? She looked like she was going to cry." Tiffany laughed. "She always looks like she's about to cry. It's her default expression. Poor little Alyssa, nobody appreciates her art." "The thing is," Brandon said, and I could hear the cruelty in his voice clearly, "I actually like it. Putting her down, I mean. It's fun. She makes it so easy. Just a little comment and she crumbles." "You're terrible," Tiffany said, but she was laughing. "She deserves it, though. Walking around with that martyr complex, acting like she's so noble for doing her stupid art thing. She could have gone to law school like Dad wanted. She could have made something of herself. But no, she had to be special. She had to be different. And now she's nothing." The conversation continued in that vein for several more minutes. They talked about ways to undermine me, things to say that would hurt the most. Brandon mentioned that he'd been deliberately sabotaging my gallery's funding applications through his connections on the Arts Foundation board. He'd been working behind the scenes to make sure I failed. I watched the entire video twice, making sure I understood everything that was being said. Then I saved it to my cloud storage, made multiple backups, and added it to my evidence folder. By the time the sun started to rise, painting my apartment in pale gold light, I had compiled a comprehensive document of abuse. Photos, emails, text messages, recorded conversations. A pattern of behavior spanning years. Evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I made myself coffee and sat by my window looking out at the city waking up. I'd been awake all night, but I didn't feel tired. I felt clear-headed, purposeful. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my family's love and respect. I'd bent myself into shapes trying to fit into their world, trying to be what they wanted while still holding on to the parts of myself that mattered. But I was done trying. I was done hoping that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, proved myself enough, they would finally see me as worthy. They would never see me that way. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because they needed me to be worthless. They needed someone to put down, to feel superior to. I served a purpose in their family dynamic, and that purpose was to be the failure that made Brandon's success more impressive. The realization should have hurt, but instead it was liberating. If nothing I did would ever be good enough, then I might as well stop trying to be good enough for them. I could start trying to be good enough for myself instead. But first, I needed them to understand what they'd done. I needed them to face consequences. Not because I wanted revenge exactly, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. But because people like my family only learned when it cost them something. Words didn't work. Boundaries didn't work. They needed to lose something they actually valued, and the only things they valued were money, power, and reputation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "How are you feeling this morning? Did you sleep at all?" I texted back. "Awake all night. But I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. Can you come over this afternoon? I want to talk to you about something." "Of course. I'll bring lunch. 1 p.m. Perfect." I spent the morning researching. I looked up Brandon's company, read every press release and news article about his recent deals. I searched for information about the Henderson project he'd been so proud of last night. I dug into public records, looking at business filings and partnership agreements. I found something interesting. The Henderson deal wasn't as solid as Brandon had made it sound. There had been concerns raised by community groups about the environmental impact of the development. Several city council members had expressed reservations. The project needed final approval from the Planning Commission, and that vote was scheduled for next month. It could still fall through. I kept digging. I found Marcus Chen through LinkedIn, the colleague Brandon had mentioned in passing once years ago in a conversation I'd overheard. Brandon had been bragging to our father about taking care of the competition. I'd looked Marcus up out of curiosity back then and had been shocked to see that he'd left the industry entirely shortly after Brandon's big promotion. I sent Marcus a careful message through LinkedIn. I introduced myself, mentioned that I was Brandon Westwood's sister, and asked if he'd be willing to talk to me about his experience working with my brother. I kept it vague professional, just enough to pique his interest without revealing my hand. To my surprise, he responded within an hour. I'd be very interested in speaking with you. Would you be available for coffee this week? We arranged to meet the following Tuesday at a cafe downtown Neutral Territory. When Jessica arrived at 1, she brought Thai food and took one look at my face and said, "You've got that look." "What look?" "That look you get when you've decided to do something." "What's going on?" I showed her everything. The photos, the emails, the recordings. I walked her through my research on Brandon's business dealings. I told her about reaching out to Marcus Chen. Jessica listened to all of it, her expression growing more thoughtful. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Alyssa, are you sure about this? Once you start down this road, there's no going back. Your family will know it was you. They'll retaliate." "Let them," I said. "What are they going to do that they haven't already done?" "Cut me out of the will I was never going to inherit anyway. Stop inviting me to family dinners where I get plates thrown at my face. I have nothing left to lose, Jess. They already took everything." She studied my face, the bruise now, a deep purple spreading across my cheek, and slowly nodded. "Okay, then I'm going to help you. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just blast everything on social media and hope for the best. We need to be strategic. That's why I called you," I said. "You're the PR genius. Tell me how to destroy them." Jessica smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "First, we need to understand what they actually care about. Your parents care about social standing and reputation. Brandon cares about his career and being seen as successful. Tiffany cares about luxury and status. So we hit them where it hurts." Over the next several hours, we planned. Jessica explained how information moved in elite circles, how scandals could be carefully cultivated through whisper networks before they ever went public. She talked about the importance of timing, of having multiple sources corroborate a story, of making sure that by the time anyone tried to do damage control, the narrative was already set. The key, she said, is that it can't look like it's coming from you. If it's obvious you're behind it, they'll just spin it as a vindictive ex-family member with a grudge. But if the information comes from multiple independent sources, if it builds naturally, then it becomes truth. How do we do that? We start with Marcus Chen. If he has evidence that Brandon stole his work, that's huge. That's not family drama, that's professional misconduct. We get that story to the right business journalist, someone who's already skeptical of nepotism in the industry. Then we let the investigation unfold naturally. And my family. We save the personal stuff for after. Once Brandon's professional reputation is damaged, once people are already questioning his integrity, then the personal abuse becomes part of a larger pattern. It's not just one isolated incident, it's evidence of a deeply flawed character. It was brilliant and terrifying. Won't people figure out I'm involved? Maybe eventually, Jessica admitted. But by then it won't matter. The damage will be done, and honestly, I don't think you should hide. I think once the dust settles, you should own it. Tell your story. Show people what happened to you. But we do that last, when you're in a position of strength, not desperation. The meeting with Marcus Chen that Tuesday was eye-opening. He arrived at the cafe looking tired and wary, a man in his mid-30s who should have been at the top of his career but instead carried himself like someone who'd been beaten down. I recognized that posture. I'd seen it in my mirror. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as he sat down. He studied my face, and I knew he was looking at the bruise still visible despite my attempts to cover it with makeup. "Your brother did that to you." I hadn't expected him to be so direct. "How did you know?" "I recognize that look," he said quietly. "The look of someone who's been hurt by a Westwood. Your brother ruined my career, my reputation, my entire life. But before he did all that, he made sure I knew exactly how powerless I was. He's a bully and a thief, and he's very good at making it look like you're the problem." "Tell me what happened," I said. Marcus told me everything. 3 years ago, he'd been a rising star at the Westwood Group, working in their commercial development division. He'd come up with an innovative concept for mixed-use urban development that incorporated sustainable design principles with luxury amenities. He'd spent months developing the proposal, doing market research, creating financial projections. He'd made the mistake of sharing his work with Brandon, who was technically his peer but had family connections. Brandon had been enthusiastic, offering to help Marcus present the idea to senior leadership. Marcus had trusted him. 2 weeks later, Brandon had presented the entire concept as his own work. When Marcus had tried to speak up, Brandon had turned it around on him, suggesting that Marcus was trying to take credit for Brandon's idea. With the Westwood family name behind him, Brandon's version of events was believed without question. But it got worse. Brandon hadn't just stolen the idea. He'd systematically destroyed Marcus's reputation. He'd spread rumors that Marcus was difficult to work with, that he had anger issues, that he was jealous of more successful colleagues. He'd made sure Marcus was excluded from important meetings and high-profile projects. Within 6 months, Marcus had been pushed out of the company entirely. I tried to fight back. Marcus said, his hands clenched around his coffee cup. I had documentation. I had drafts with my name on them, emails with timestamps. I consulted with lawyers. But the Westwoods have more money and better lawyers, and they made it clear that if I pursued legal action, they would bury me. They said they'd sue me for defamation, that they'd make sure I never worked in any related field again. And they had the power to do it. So you walked away. I had no choice. I had student loans, rent, no savings. I couldn't afford a drawn-out legal battle against a family that treats lawsuits like minor inconveniences. So I left the industry and started consulting. I'm getting by, but I'll never have the career I should have had. Your brother took that from me. I felt rage building in my chest, cold and focused. I have evidence that Brandon has been actively sabotaging my career too. I have recordings of him talking about it, admitting that he enjoys hurting people. And I think I can help you get your story out there in a way that won't leave you vulnerable to retaliation. Marcus leaned forward. I'm listening. I explained Jessica's plan. We would approach a business journalist who specialized in corporate ethics and corruption. We would give them everything Marcus had, all his documentation, but we'd frame it as part of a larger investigation into nepotism and idea theft in the commercial real estate industry. Marcus would be one of several sources, not the only one. The story would be bigger than just him versus Brandon. And once that story is out there, I continued, it opens the door for other people to come forward. I'm betting Brandon has burned other people besides you. Once the first crack appears in his reputation, others will feel safe speaking up. What's in this for you? Marcus asked. I touched my bruised cheek. He threw a plate in my face at a family dinner. My parents did nothing. His fiancée took pictures. I want him to face consequences for once in his entitled life. I want him to know what it feels like to lose everything. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then he extended his hand. I'm in. Tell me what you need. Over the next 2 weeks, everything clicked into place with an almost frightening efficiency. Jessica used her connections to get Marcus's story to Sarah Whitmore, an investigative journalist who'd built her career on exposing corruption in Boston's business community. Sarah was immediately interested, especially when Jessica casually mentioned that this might be connected to the upcoming Henderson development deal, which had already attracted controversy. Sarah started her investigation, reaching out to former Westwood Group employees under the guise of a larger story about corporate culture in real estate development. Several people who'd worked with Brandon had stories. A woman who'd been sexually harassed by him at a company party and then transferred to a less desirable position when she'd reported it. A man who'd questioned one of Brandon's financial projections and had been written up for being difficult and combative. An intern who'd witnessed Brandon taking credit for a junior employee's market analysis. None of these people had been willing to speak up before because they were afraid of the Westwood family's power and influence. But when approached by a respected journalist as part of a broader investigation with the promise of anonymity if desired, they opened up. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeding information to Jessica, who fed it to Sarah. I never spoke to Sarah directly. As far as the journalist knew, Jessica had simply heard rumors through her PR network and thought there might be a story worth investigating. While Sarah was building her exposé, I focused on my own work. The gallery was indeed in financial trouble, but I'd been having conversations with the owner, David, about potential solutions. He was exhausted and ready to step back, but he didn't want to see the space close entirely. What if we restructured? I suggested one afternoon in his office. What if instead of one owner funding everything, we became a cooperative? Multiple stakeholders shared financial responsibility, shared decision-making. David looked intrigued. Who would the stakeholders be? Artists primarily. The people whose work we show. They'd invest in the space, but they'd also have a say in how it's run. We could also bring in art patrons, people who believe in supporting emerging artists. Make it less about profit margins and more about community building. That's a big change, David said. It would take a lot of work. I know, but I'm willing to do that work. I believe in this place. He studied me for a moment. Your face is healing nicely. I told him I'd had an accident, walked into a cabinet door. He clearly didn't believe me, but he'd been kind enough not to push. Yeah, it's getting better. Alyssa, I've been thinking about promoting you to head curator. Even before this cooperative idea, I was planning to offer you the position. You've got a good eye and you care about the artists. But I need to know you're serious about this, that you're not going to leave for something more stable. I'm serious, I said. This is what I want to do. I want to build something here. Then let's do it. Let's save this place. We spent the following week meeting with artists and potential investors, pitching the cooperative model. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Artists were tired of galleries that treated them as commodities. Patrons were excited about the opportunity to be directly involved in supporting the arts. By the end of the month, we had enough commitments to restructure. My career, which Brandon had been so sure was failing, was actually transforming into something better than I'd imagined. I would have real authority, real creative control. I would be building a community, not just working for someone else. At the same time, Brandon's world was starting to crack. Sarah Whitmore's article came out on a Wednesday morning, published in the Boston Business Journal with the headline, "The Cost of Nepotism: How Family Connections Shield Corporate Misconduct." Brandon's name was mentioned specifically, along with details of Marcus Chen's stolen project, and quotes from other former employees describing a pattern of abusive behavior and unethical practices. The article was thorough and damning. Sarah had done her homework, corroborating every claim with documentation. She'd even dug up Brandon's college disciplinary records, which showed a pattern of plagiarism allegations that had been quietly dismissed thanks to generous donations from the Westwood family. The business community's response was swift. The article was shared widely on LinkedIn and Twitter. Prominent business leaders began distancing themselves from Brandon and the Westwood Group. The Planning Commission announced they were postponing the vote on the Henderson development pending further review of the project's leadership team. Most crucially, Charles Henderson himself released a statement saying he was troubled by these allegations and was re-evaluating his business relationships to ensure they align with his values. I watched it all unfold online, refreshing news sites and social media feeds obsessively. Jessica kept me updated on the behind-the-scenes reactions, the conversations happening in boardrooms and at business lunches throughout the city. "It's working," she told me over the phone. "People are talking. And not just about the stolen project. They're questioning everything about Brandon now. How he got his position, whether his other deals were legitimate, what else he might be hiding." 3 days after the article came out, the Westwood Group announced that Brandon had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The company's stock price dipped slightly, nothing catastrophic, but enough to make shareholders nervous. That's when my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but I was curious. I wanted to hear what she'd say. I put her on speaker so Jessica, who was at my apartment, could hear too. "Alyssa." My mother's voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. "We need to talk about what's happening to your brother." "Hello to you too, Mom. Don't be flippant with me. Your brother's career is being destroyed by vicious lies, and I know you're involved." "How would I be involved?" I asked calmly. "I don't work in commercial real estate. I don't know any business journalists. I'm just an art gallery assistant, remember? Too insignificant to matter." "Don't play games," she hissed. "Someone is feeding information to that reporter. Someone who has access to family information. Who else would do this?" "Maybe someone who Brandon heard," I suggested. "Maybe one of the many people whose careers he destroyed or whose ideas he stole. Did it ever occur to you that your golden child might actually be the problem?" "Brandon made a mistake," she said, her voice rising. "One mistake years ago. That Chen person was going to fail anyway. Brandon just accelerated the inevitable. But this media circus, this is destroying everything we've built." I felt cold rage wash over me. "A mistake? You think stealing someone's career is just a mistake? People do what they need to do to succeed. That's how the world works. You've always been too naive to understand that." "No, Mom. That's how your world works. That's how you taught Brandon the world works. And now he's facing consequences for it." "We're your family," she said, and now there was a pleading note in her voice. "You're supposed to protect family. Instead, you're helping destroy us." "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm just not protecting you anymore. There's a difference. If you don't stop this, if you don't fix this, you're dead to us. Do you understand? You will not be welcome in this family." I looked at Jessica, who was staring at my phone with wide eyes. I felt surprisingly calm. "I haven't been welcome in this family for 26 years, Mom. You're not threatening me with anything I haven't already lived through. Your father will cut you off completely. The trust fund, the inheritance, everything." I laughed a sharp, bitter sound. "What trust fund? What inheritance? You've never given me anything. Every dollar I have, I earned myself. You have nothing I want." You ungrateful little bitch, my mother spat, her composure finally cracking completely. After everything we've done for you. We raised you, fed you, educated you. We gave you every opportunity and you threw it away to play with paints. And now you're trying to ruin your brother out of pure jealousy. Goodbye, Mom, I said and ended the call. My hands were shaking. Jessica grabbed them, squeezing tight. You okay? Yeah, I said, and I was surprised to find it was true. Actually, I'm better than okay. That felt good. She'll call back. I know. I'm blocking her number. And I did right there. I blocked my mother, my father, and Brandon. Tiffany had already blocked me weeks ago, probably worried I'd try to hit her up for money or something equally ridiculous. I stared at my contact list, seeing all those family names crossed out, and felt lighter. But I wasn't done yet. The article had damaged Brandon's professional reputation, but I wanted the personal reckoning too. I wanted the people who knew our family socially, who'd watched me be dismissed and diminished at countless dinner parties and charity events, to understand what had been happening behind closed doors. It's time for the next phase, I told Jessica. I want to post the videos. She nodded slowly. Are you absolutely sure? Once those are out there, everyone will know it's you. Your family will definitely retaliate. I'm sure. I want people to see who they really are. We spent an afternoon carefully editing the footage I had. Not to change the content, but to remove any information that could identify other innocent people, and to create a clear narrative. We put together a 4-minute video that showed Brandon's cruelty, Tiffany's mockery, my parents' dismissiveness. The final clip was from that terrible dinner, showing Brandon throwing the plate at my face. I created an anonymous Instagram account and posted the video with a simple caption. This is what emotional abuse looks like in wealthy families. This is what happens behind closed doors. These people are the Westwoods of Boston, and this is how they treat their daughter. Then I shared it to my personal Facebook account with a longer post. I've spent my entire life being told I'm not good enough, that I'm a disappointment, that I don't deserve a place at my family's table. For years, I believed them. I thought if I just worked harder, achieved more, proved myself, they would finally see my worth. But the truth is, they never will. Because they need me to be worthless to feel superior. So I'm done trying. I'm done being silent. This is what my brother did to me at a family dinner 3 weeks ago. This is what my parents allowed. This is the family that's currently crying victim because my brother's career is being destroyed by the truth. I'm not hiding anymore. I attached the video and hit post. Then I waited. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, the post had been shared dozens of times. Within 2 hours, it had hundreds of shares. By the end of the day, it had gone viral in Boston's social circles. Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out with messages of support. People I barely knew commented with their own stories of toxic family dynamics. Several local domestic violence organizations shared my post, using it as an example of how abuse manifests in seemingly perfect families. The video also caught the attention of local news stations. 2 reporters called asking if I'd be willing to do an interview. I declined, feeling that the post spoke for itself, but the fact that they wanted to cover it showed how much attention the story was getting. The Society page of the Boston Globe ran a piece about the scandal, carefully worded but clearly referencing my family. Prominent local family faces allegations of abuse and corporate misconduct. The article didn't just focus on Brandon's professional issues, but also on the toxic family dynamics, citing my social media post as evidence of a broader pattern of behavior. The country club where my parents were members quietly suggested they might want to take a voluntary leave of absence. Invitations to charity galas and society events dried up. My mother's garden club asked her to step down from the board. Brandon was fired from the Westwood Group, not placed on leave. Actually terminated. The company released a statement saying they had completed their internal investigation and found evidence of multiple ethical violations. They were distancing themselves from him as publicly as possible, trying to protect the family business from his toxicity. The Henderson deal fell through completely. Charles Henderson released a statement saying he could not in good conscience partner with individuals who demonstrated such a profound lack of ethical judgment. The entire development project was put on hold indefinitely. Tiffany broke up with Brandon via text message just 3 months before their planned wedding. According to Jessica's sources in the social scene, Tiffany had made sure everyone knew she'd been deceived by Brandon, that she'd had no idea what kind of person he really was, that she was a victim too. It was transparently self-serving, but it worked for her purposes. Within a week, she was photographed at a restaurant with a hedge fund manager. My phone rang constantly for days. Reporters, talk show producers, podcast hosts, everyone wanted to interview me. I declined most of them, but I did agree to speak with one journalist, a woman who specialized in family trauma and recovery. The interview was published in an online magazine and framed my story not as revenge porn but as a necessary breaking of silence. For too long, we've operated under the belief that family loyalty means protecting abusers, I was quoted as saying. But real loyalty means holding people accountable. Real love means demanding better behavior. My family mistook enabling for love and cruelty for strength. I'm not destroying them by telling the truth. They destroyed themselves by thinking the truth didn't matter. A week after I'd posted the video, there was a knock on my apartment door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw my parents standing there. They looked different. Smaller. My mother's hair wasn't perfectly styled. My father's tie was slightly crooked. They looked like what they were, people whose carefully constructed world had collapsed. I almost didn't open the door. But I realized I needed this. I needed to face them one more time on my terms in my space. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. What do you want? My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged. It was the first time I'd ever seen her look truly disheveled. Alyssa, please. You have to help Brandon. You have to tell people this is all a misunderstanding. You have to take down that video. A misunderstanding, I repeated flatly. Which part was the misunderstanding? The part where he threw a plate at my face? Or the part where you both stood by and did nothing? My father spoke up, his voice stern, but with an undertone of desperation I'd never heard before. This has gone too far. Whatever Brandon did to you, he's your brother. He's family. We take care of our own. You need to make this right. Do we? I looked directly at my father for the first time in years, really looked at him. When did you take care of me, Dad? When did either of you? Catherine started crying, mascara running down her cheeks. But I'm your mother. You're my daughter. You're part of this family. I felt something break inside me, but it wasn't painful. It was liberating. No, Mom, I was never part of your family. I was never given a real seat at your table. I was kept in the corner, dismissed, mocked, and abused. And you let it happen. You participated in it. What do you want from us? My father asked, and for a moment he looked genuinely bewildered, as if he couldn't comprehend why I was doing this. I don't want anything from you anymore, I said quietly. That's the point. I wanted your love and respect for years and you never gave it. Now I don't need it. I built my own life and it doesn't include you. My mother reached out as if to touch my arm. But we're your family. Blood is blood. We made mistakes, but you're making this worse. Brandon's career is destroyed. Our reputation is ruined. People are saying terrible things about us. They're saying true things about you, I corrected. There's a difference. You're not upset that Brandon hurt me. You're upset that people found out about it. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. You did this, Catherine said, her tears turning to anger. You destroyed your brother's career. You humiliated us publicly. You ungrateful little... I'm closing the door now, I said calmly, cutting off whatever she was about to call me. Don't come back here. Don't call me. Don't try to contact me through other people. We're done. You can't just walk away from your family, my father said, his voice rising. Watch me, I said, and shut the door on my mother's protests and my father's stern demands. I turned the deadbolt and stood there for a moment, my hand against the cool wood, listening as their voices faded down the hallway. I heard my mother crying, my father's low, angry tones trying to console her. Then, the sound of the building's exterior door closing, and they were gone. I walked back to my couch and sat down, expecting to feel something big. Relief, maybe, or sadness or triumph. But what I felt was simply peace. A quiet sense of rightness, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. You okay? Want company? I'm good, I texted back. Better than good, actually. We're still on for the gallery meeting tomorrow, right? Absolutely. I'm bringing coffee and Marcus is coming too. He wants to help with the cooperative setup. The cooperative? My career. My actual life, not the life my family had tried to force me into. Over the next few months, everything continued to shift and settle into new patterns. The Riverside Gallery officially became Cornerstone Arts Cooperative. We had 12 artist stakeholders and 5 patron investors. I was named executive director and head curator. My first major exhibition, titled Reclaimed Voices, featured emerging local artists whose work told stories of resilience and transformation. It was everything I'd dreamed of creating. The opening night was everything I'd hoped for and more. The space was beautiful, transformed from the shabby gallery it had been into something warm and vibrant. We'd painted the brick walls white, installed better lighting, refinished the concrete floors. Art hung throughout the space, each piece carefully chosen and placed to create a narrative flow. We'd set up a long table in the center of the main room for the reception, a beautiful farmhouse-style table that we'd found at a vintage shop and refinished ourselves. It was surrounded by mismatched chairs, each one unique and comfortable. As people gathered around it, sharing food and wine and conversation, I felt something click into place in my chest. Jessica noticed me staring at the table and came over, handing me a glass of wine. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, surprised to find it was absolutely true. "I'm really okay." "You did it," she said, her voice warm with pride. "You got out, you survived, and you built something beautiful." Marcus Chen was there too, along with several other people who'd been hurt by Brandon and had found the courage to come forward. He was working as a consultant for one of our patron investors, now slowly rebuilding his career. He raised his glass to me from across the room, a gesture of solidarity and gratitude. I touched the small scar on my cheekbone, barely visible now but still there when I looked closely. It didn't hurt anymore. If anything, it had become a reminder of my strength, proof that I'd survived and chosen myself. The exhibition was a success. We sold nearly every piece. Local media covered it positively, framing it as an example of how the arts could create community and provide healing. Other galleries began reaching out, asking if I'd be interested in consulting or curating for them. My career, which Brandon had been so sure was failing, was flourishing in ways I'd never imagined. Not because I was making millions or closing big deals, but because I was doing work that mattered with people who valued me. I heard updates about my family through the grapevine. Brandon had moved back in with our parents, unable to find work in his field. He was bitter and angry, blaming everyone but himself. My parents were struggling to maintain their social standing, but the damage to their reputation was severe. They'd been forced to resign from several boards and committees. The invitations to important events had dried up. Some people might think I should feel guilty, that I'd gone too far, been too cruel in my revenge. But standing there in my own gallery, surrounded by art that celebrated survival and transformation, holding a glass of wine that I'd poured for myself, I felt only peace. I hadn't destroyed Brandon. I'd simply removed the protection he'd always enjoyed, the shield of family reputation and money that had allowed him to hurt people without consequences. I'd given his victims a voice and shown the world who he really was. If he was destroyed by the truth, that said more about his actions than mine. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, I stood by the window of the gallery, looking out at the city. I thought about Brandon, probably sitting alone in his childhood bedroom, his career in ruins, his fiancée gone, his reputation destroyed. I thought about my parents facing the social consequences of enabling an abuser. I thought about Tiffany, already attached to someone new, having learned nothing. And I thought about myself standing in a space I'd helped create, surrounded by people who chose to be there, living a life built on my own terms. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window, to the faint scar on my cheek, to the life I'd built from the ashes of the one they'd tried to burn down. "This table is mine," I whispered. "I don't need anyone's permission to sit at it." Behind me, I heard Jessica laugh at something one of our remaining guests said. The sound was warm and genuine, the kind of laughter I'd never heard at my family's dinner table. I turned away from the window and walked back to join them, leaving my reflection and my past behind. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't about making them suffer. It was about building a life so full and beautiful that their absence didn't leave a hole. It was about surrounding myself with people who valued me, who celebrated my successes instead of diminishing them, who offered comfort instead of criticism. It was about finally understanding that I'd never been the problem. The table I'd sat at for so many years had been broken from the start, built on a foundation of favoritism and cruelty. No amount of trying to earn my place would have fixed it. But this table, the one I'd built with my own hands and filled with people who chose to be here, this table was whole. And I would never let anyone make me feel like I didn't deserve a seat at it again.